This is the Dhammakaya Temple, a Theravada Buddhist temple located north of Thailand's capital city Bangkok. And all those lights? Those are 210,000 individual LED lanterns, all set up to celebrate one of the most sacred holidays for millions of Buddhists around the world, Vesak. So what's Vesak all about? Well, the lanterns tell the story. Here we see the Buddha standing on a lotus flower, with one hand raised to the sky. This is a common depiction of the Buddha's birth, when the baby Buddha miraculously took 7 steps, causing lotus flowers to bloom beneath his feet as he declared, "As this birth is a Buddha's birth, it is my last birth. Just in this one birth I shall save all." And here we see the Buddha meditating, when he achieved awakening meditating under the Bodhi tree. And here the Buddha's death, typically depicted as him reclining on his right side. Vesak commemorates all 3 life events, the birth, awakening, and death of the Buddha. As the scholar of Buddhism Donald Swearer says, these 3 events demonstrate the significance of the Buddha's life story as a historical model which defines the Buddhist tradition. In other words, the life story of the Buddha serves as a fundamental reference point for Buddhist teachings and practices. The holiday is celebrated on the first full moon in the month of Vesak on the Hindu calendar, usually corresponding to April and May on the Gregorian solar calendar, though different countries use different lunar calendars, so the exact date changes from place to place. For Tibetan Buddhists, the day falls on the 15th day of the 4th month on the Tibetan calendar, Sagadawa. It's believed that during this month, the results of your wholesome actions are multiplied 100,000 times. Vesak also goes by a lot of names. Throughout Asia, it's sometimes called Wesak, Buddha Jayanti, Hanamatsuri, or simply Buddha Day. The meaning and significance of the holiday also somewhat differs across the Buddhist world. Especially within Theravada and Tibetan Buddhism, it's believed that the Buddha was born, achieved awakening, and passed away on the same day under a full moon during the same month. However, other Buddhist traditions recognize this day only as the Buddha's birth, and say his enlightenment and death occurred on different days in different months. In South Korea, for example, it's recognized only as the Buddha's birthday. So Vesak's importance and understanding varies in different countries, and is especially popular in Southeast Asia. Historians don't really know when Vesak was first observed, or many of the dates associated with the Buddha's biography for that matter. Festivals in the month of Vesak do appear in ancient texts. Back in the 400s, the Chinese monk and traveler Faxian talked about a festival during this month that involved a parade of images of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. The Great Chronicle of Sri Lanka, or the Mahavamsa, which dates back to the 400s or 500 CE, also mentions festivals during this month. But we're not exactly sure what these festivals were all about. We don't know what they were celebrating or how they connect to the modern version of the holiday. They might have been an early form of Vesak. In the 7th century, the Buddhist monk Xuanzang mentions a tradition that the Buddha died at the age of 80 on the 15th day of Vesak. But he didn't mention the Buddha's birth or awakening, nor did he mention any sort of festival. And he also mentioned that different schools had competing dates on the calendar. So the link between these ancient festivals during Vesak and the events of the Buddha's life is still a mystery. As we'll see later, Vesak was essentially reinvented, or took on its modern form in the late 1800s, though it was celebrated sometime before this. There are a lot of practices that Buddhists do to celebrate Vesak, but before we talk about those, it's important to differentiate between monastics and lay people, who have a symbiotic relationship in Buddhism, with one relying on the other and vice versa. Monks and nuns rely on the laity for gifts, food, and other material items, while the laity receive teachings, blessings, and good fortunes by supporting the monastics. And we see this relationship with Vesak. Lay people will often put on white garments and travel to a local temple or monastery to pray. There they may attend an assembly to hear a reading about the life of the Buddha. Monastics will often lead processions of other monks and lay people around sacred sites. And lay people also take the opportunity to give alms to the monks. Back in 2012, on the 2600th anniversary of the Buddha's awakening, over 22,000 monks gathered in downtown Bangkok to celebrate. As part of the event, the senior monks from the Dhammakaya Temple, which we saw earlier, organized almsgiving events for the laity. Many lay people will also leave flowers or light candles before a statue of the Buddha. In Indonesia, thousands of monks and lay people gather at Borobudur, the largest Buddhist temple in the world, and also technically the largest mandala in the world, because it forms a gigantic mandala when viewed from above. Monks lead everyone in processions and chants, they walk through the crowd blessing devotees, and apparently they also wear really cool umbrella hats. Stylish. In the days leading up to Vesak, the monks will prepare by collecting water from the nearby Jumprit spring, which is believed to be especially holy and pure. The water is then blessed for lay people to bathe the Buddha, pouring water over a statue of the baby Buddha using a ladle. At the Borobudur celebration, altars are set up where lay people can wait in line to bathe the Buddha. This is believed to earn merit for the devotees. The festival culminates in a walking meditation that circles the temple before everyone gathers at night to release thousands of paper lanterns into the sky. Vesak is also a big deal in Singapore. Lay Buddhists will leave food and flower offerings before the Buddha at local temples. Monastics will also lead processions practicing what's known as the 3 steps and 1 bow meditation. The name is pretty self-explanatory, but it's very strenuous. Over the course of hours, they take 3 steps before crouching down on their hands and knees, touching their foreheads to the ground as chants are sung around them. Lay people sometimes join as well, and participants are encouraged to cultivate mindfulness as they go along. On Vesak, it's also customary to set animals free who are in captivity, and in Sri Lanka, the president even pardons people arrested for nonviolent crimes, to incur good karma and as a gesture of goodwill to the country. In recent decades, Vesak has taken on a more carnival vibe in some countries, with neon lights and street food. Buddhist groups in cities around the world sponsor massive light displays known as Vesak pandals or toranas, basically psychedelic depictions of the Buddha's life story. People gather outside at night to take in the light shows and enjoy food carts that gather to give out free food to anyone who asks, sometimes served by your own president. Yeah, that's the Sri Lankan president right there. Though for many, it's not really a holiday where you let loose. Buddhists are encouraged to eat only a vegetarian diet and not to consume alcohol during the holiday. In fact, in Sri Lanka, slaughterhouses and liquor stores are closed for 2 days. While Vesak celebrates moments of the Buddha's life over 2,500 years ago, scholars of Buddhist history have found that the modern version of the holiday was essentially reinvented during a major Buddhist revival in Southeast Asia, as part of an anti-colonial movement responding to Western imperial powers. And over the course of 100 years, Vesak blossomed into a global holiday, helping to establish Buddhist pride and a pan-Buddhist identity. The story begins in the 19th century here in the British colony of Ceylon, now the country of Sri Lanka. In 1815, the British colonial government banned Vesak, and in the following decades, Christian missionaries made a huge proselytizing effort on the island, publicly speaking out against Buddhism, attacking Buddhism in sermons and in writing, labeling it as paganism and idolatry. And the colonial government was happy to help, financially supporting Christian churches, schools, and welfare programs. Buddhist monks responded by debating Christian missionaries in writing and staging public defenses of Buddhism in front of huge audiences of thousands of laypeople. Around the same time in the 1880s, an American man and president of the Theosophical Society, Henry Steele Olcott, converted to Buddhism and was particularly fascinated by Buddhism in Ceylon, and so arrived on the island in 1884. He quickly found common cause with a group of Buddhist reformers dedicated to ousting Christian missionaries from their country. As part of this mission, Olcott founded the Buddhist Defense Committee and started functioning as an intermediary between the Buddhist community and the British colonial government, lobbying on the Buddhist community's behalf for greater rights. His stated goal was to counter the power and influence of Christian missionaries, and he did that in part by adapting things that he thought worked for Christianity. For example, a catechism, a succinct, comprehensive summary of doctrine that unifies and educates a particular community. And so he developed a Buddhist catechism, specifically designed to counter Christianity. That same year, Buddhist reformers designed an official Buddhist flag, again with a stated goal to unify Buddhists and counter Christianity and the colonial government. Olcott praised it in his diary. It was time that our colleagues had the happy thought of devising a flag which could be adopted by all Buddhist nations as the universal symbol of their faith, thus giving the same purpose as that of the cross does for all Christians. Vesak became a symbol of the anti-colonial movement when the British government declared Christmas a public holiday. Buddhist reformers saw this as growing government-supported Christian dominance, so they petitioned Vesak to be made a national holiday too, as a potential way to unify Buddhists and spread Buddhism in general. Olcott even went so far as to call it the Buddhist Christmas. Their lobbying efforts paid off in 1885 when the colonial government agreed and reinstated Vesak. The scholar of religion Stephen Prothero has argued that creating a Buddhist flag, a Buddhist catechism, and lobbying for colonial powers to recognize Vesak were all related and could be interpreted in 2 overlapping ways. First, as symbols of resistance against Christian proselytizing, and second, as ecumenical, unifying Buddhist symbols, an assertion that all Buddhists were related in some sense. A Buddhist magazine article published in 1937 held up Vesak as a unifying pan-Buddhist holiday. It is right and well that Buddhists all over the world should combine in the joyous celebration of Vesak, that it should be a time when all differences are forgotten, all quarrels are made up, when scattered members of the family meet together once more and with one heart join in laying their pure and lovely flower offerings on the holy shrines of the great teacher. In many ways, celebrating Vesak and creating the Buddhist flag go hand in hand as representations of this broader movement, what scholars call Buddhist modernism, that flourished throughout Asia in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Buddhist modernists argued that while the Dharma was ancient, the Dharma remained important to people in the modern world. At the time, observing Vesak, especially out in public, and especially outside of monastic contexts and even outside of temples, was a subversive act, an act of establishing a public Buddhist identity in a colonized country. In the following decades, the holiday caught on across the region. The colonial government in Singapore first recognized Vesak as a national holiday in 1924. In 1927, the Theosophical Society established the first recorded Vesak celebration at the Borobudur Temple, the same temple in Indonesia that we saw earlier in the video. And Vesak was established in Korea as early as 1928, at the time when it was under Japanese colonial rule, where it was adapted with the Japanese springtime festival of Hanamatsuri. As many of these countries gained independence, Vesak was a clearly observable expression of Buddhist identity, pride, and modernization. Vesak then was politically and religiously important, an assertion that Buddhism was indeed a world religion, deserving of global recognition and respect. In the past few decades, Vesak has grown even more popular around the world, as Buddhist populations outside of Asia have grown. In 1999, the UN General Assembly formally recognized Vesak. Western governments have started to recognize it as well, with President Joe Biden making the first official Vesak statement by an American president in 2021, right before the White House celebrated its first Vesak celebration. Now, the more cynical among us might view this as empty pageantry, but I think if we consider the perspectives of those Buddhist reformers back in colonized Sri Lanka, these gestures would probably be viewed as signs of strong progress in establishing Buddhism as a global religion. In many respects, their stated goal of making Vesak translatable into the Western context has been extremely successful. If you want to learn more about how ancient Buddhist ideas have been received and interpreted here in the 21st century, then you should really check out today's sponsor, Sacred and Profane, a podcast produced by the Religion, Race, and Democracy Lab at the University of Virginia. I'm very excited about this partnership because Sacred and Profane is an academic podcast featuring and hosted by scholars of religion and dedicated to the critical study of religion. As a religious studies academic and content creator myself, it's always great to partner with someone that shares the same principles and mission of Religion for Breakfast. Each episode of Sacred and Profane explores the ways religion shapes how we act in the world and how religion shapes how we think about the world. In one episode, they sit down with UVA professor and scholar of Buddhism, Dr. Sonam Khatru, to discuss Emperor Ashoka of the Mauryan dynasty, a Buddhist emperor who ruled much of the Indian subcontinent back in the 200s BCE. They examine his legacy through the lens of a best-selling comic book, which tells the story of the transformation from a ruthless conqueror to a remorseful, compassionate ruler. They compare how this comic book squares with the archaeological evidence of Ashoka's own edicts, which may give us a window into how Ashoka thought about morality. One of their most recent episodes is titled A Church, an Ashram, and a Pipeline, which explores an unlikely alliance between a historic black church in Virginia and an interfaith yoga community. They teamed up to block a pipeline that was going to cut through a rural county in Virginia. These are the sort of topics you can expect from Sacred and Profane. Thoughtful discussions about how religion is embedded in every aspect of our day-to-day life. So if you're a fan of the academic study of religion, and you're watching Religion for Breakfast, I know you're a fan, then subscribe to Sacred and Profane by following the link here on screen or click the link pinned in the comments below. Thanks, everyone.